Want to bake bakery-worthy loaves at home? In 10 Simple Tips for Baking Bread, you'll learn practical, step-by-step strategies that demystify the process. From measuring like a pro and dialing in temperature to understanding hydration and proofing, these tips will boost flavor, texture, and confidence. We'll cover how to proof yeast correctly, create the right environment, time your proofs, judge when bread is baked, and safely handle high hydration dough. Plus, you'll master kneading and learn how to cool and store your bread so it stays fresh. 1. Master the art of measuring like a pro. Here's the truth nobody talks about. Your measuring cup could be sabotaging your entire bread-making journey. Inaccurate ingredient measurement is the #1 cause of problems in bread making. When you scoop flour with a cup, you might be packing in as much as 30% more flour than the recipe needs. Our best measuring tool is a scale. Accurate to the gram, a scale ensures that if a recipe calls for 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 120 grams, that's exactly what goes into the bowl. Professional bakers never use cups because they know precision makes all the difference between a dense brick and a fluffy masterpiece. 2. Temperature is everything in bread making. Temperature is one of the most critical elements of the bread making process, because it has such a direct impact on fermentation. Think of yeast as tiny living creatures, they're finicky about their environment. Too cold, and they'll go dormant like bears in winter. Too hot, and you'll literally cook them to death. Not only do we want our dough to be at the optimal temperature, 75 degrees Fahrenheit to 78 degrees Fahrenheit, after it's mixed, but we also want to maintain that temperature throughout the process. When using active dry yeast, the ideal temperature for proofing the bread dough is around 80 degrees Fahrenheit to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, 27 degrees Celsius to 29 degrees Celsius. At this temperature range, the yeast is most active and can properly ferment the dough. 3. Understanding hydration will transform your loaves. Bread is made with only a few ingredients, flour and water being the most fundamental of them. Understanding the ratio between them, also known as hydration, or dough or bread hydration, can tell you a great deal about what qualities to expect from your dough and your finished loaf. This isn't just baker jargon, it's your roadmap to consistent results. If I go to make a recipe with all-purpose flour and a hydration percentage in the 75% to 85% range, I know before even mixing the dough that it will likely be slack or sticky. And similarly, a recipe hydrated in the 55% to 65% range will likely feel firm or even stiff. Less water means a tighter crumb. More water means an airier, more open crumb. 4. Proof your yeast the right way. When you proof yeast, all you're doing is proving that it is alive. The yeast is eating sugar and emitting bubbles of carbon dioxide because that is what yeast does. If you start with brand new yeast well within its use-by date, it is not strictly necessary to proof every time you bake, especially if you make bread frequently. But here's the thing, why risk it? To proof the yeast, dissolve it in a dish of warm water with 1/2 teaspoon of sugar. You want the water to be around 110. Within roughly 5 to 10 minutes, you should see a creamy foam forming on top. If nothing happens, your yeast is dead, and you've just saved yourself hours of frustration. 5. Create the perfect proofing environment. Finding a warm spot for your dough to rise can be tricky, especially during winter months. My kitchen was put on another sweater 63 degrees Fahrenheit. It was obvious why my loaves weren't turning out well. My kitchen was too cold for the dough to thrive. Here's where creative bakers get ingenious. A dryer is a warm, cozy, draft-free spot for proofing bread dough. Yes, reader, that's right. I've been bulk fermenting my doughs in my dryer. And if your kitchen is cold, proof your bread dough in the oven by simply turning on the oven light to encourage bread rise, as the heat of these little lights can help ovens reach 100 degrees Fahrenheit. 6. Time your proofing like a master. The dough should generally be proofed for around 1 to 4 hours at a warm temperature overnight, or more, at a cold refrigerator temperature. As the proofing temperature increases, the total fermentation time will decrease. This relationship is crucial to understand because timing isn't just about following a recipe. Temperature is one of the main factors in determining how quickly or slowly your no-knead dough rises. Proofs. This includes the temperature of ingredients in your dough, as well as the ambient temperature of the room where your dough is rising. If it's particularly warm in your kitchen, 70 F+, reduce the amount of yeast to 1 gram or know your bread may be ready to shape sooner than 18 hours. 7. Know when your bread is perfectly baked. Fully cooked bread will be 190,200 degrees F. Bread recipes that include milk will need to cook until 200 degrees, but since this one doesn't, I take it out once it reaches 190 degrees. Forget the golden brown test, that's just the surface. The real indicator lies inside your loaf. Give the top of a loaf a gentle tap, it should sound hollow. For wet dough, like ciabatta, the core bread baking temperature should be around 96 C, 205 F. The ideal average bread core temperature should read 93.3 circa, 200 F. A digital thermometer takes all the guesswork out of this crucial final step. 8. Handle high hydration dough without fear. Sticky dough intimidates many home bakers, but it shouldn't. This is a 80% hydration dough. It's supposed to be a shaggy, messy, lumpy dough. It will be sticky to the touch and impossible to knead, because it doesn't need kneading. The trick is working with the dough, not fighting against it. Some people oil their work surface and lightly oil their hands during kneading or folding. Some people lightly wet their hands. I prefer to use my hands dry, with maybe a bit of flour. Test different methods and see what works for you. Each baker develops their own technique through practice. 9. Master the art of kneading. The purpose of kneading is to develop gluten. Gluten is a protein formed when two other proteins, glutenin and gliadin, combine with water and then get agitated, stirred, mixed, or kneaded. This process transforms a shaggy mess into smooth, elastic dough that can trap gas and create the perfect texture. Even if your dough doesn't call for any fat, a small amount of oil on the counter will not adversely affect the dough. On the contrary, that tiny amount of added fat will probably help to keep the bread from staling too quickly after baking. Don't be afraid of getting your hands dirty, this is where the magic happens. 10. Cool and store your bread properly. Cool baked bread in the pan for 10-15 minutes, then overturn pan and turn loaf out onto a cooling rack or folded towel to finish cooling. If you leave the bread in the pan for much longer than that, you'll steam it, which may cause some parts of your loaf to go soggy. Patience here is absolutely essential. The best way to store fresh bread is by keeping it in a zip-top bag at room temperature, don't put it in the fridge. If you want to keep your bread for longer, you can freeze it. Wrap the bread in plastic wrap and then in a layer of foil. This will provide extra protection from any freezer burn and prevent the loaf from drying out. The bread you bake today will be better than the loaf you made last week, and next month's creation will surpass them both. Each loaf teaches you something new about timing, texture, and technique. More than 1 in 3 consumers claim to be proactive in preventing health issues. By baking your own bread, you're joining a movement toward healthier, more intentional eating while mastering one of humanity's oldest crafts. What will your next loaf teach you?